Clara Bennett's hands shook as she stood before the towering gates of the Langley estate, clutching her worn leather bag against her chest. The morning sun cast long shadows over the pristine lawns, and her pulse raced with a mix of urgency and faint hope. At 34, with barely enough money to feed her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, this job interview was her last chance. "Miss Bennett." A sharp-featured woman in a crisp suit swung the gate open. "I'm Evelyn Carter, head of household staff. Come with me." Clara smoothed her thrift store dress and followed Evelyn up the curving driveway. The mansion loomed ahead, its tall windows gleaming like watchful eyes. Inside, marble floors reflected their every step as Evelyn guided her through hallways lined with invaluable paintings. "The role is to tend to Mr. Nathaniel Langley," Evelyn explained briskly. "He suffered a severe accident 6 months ago and has been unresponsive ever since. We've already gone through 5 caregivers. None lasted more than a few weeks." Clara's throat tightened. "Why did they leave?" Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. "They found it difficult. Mr. Langley requires constant attention, and the isolation can wear on people. The wing where you'll be working is separate from the main house. You'll have your own quarters next to his." They stopped in front of a set of grand double doors. Evelyn turned to Clara, her expression unreadable. "The pay is $8,000 a month, with lodging and meals provided. You'll work 6 days a week, with 1 day off to see your daughter. We know your situation, Miss Bennett, and we're prepared to advance your first month's pay today if you accept the position." Clara's heart leapt. $8,000 a month. More than she had ever earned. She could move Lily out of their cramped Seattle apartment, pay off their medical bills, maybe even save for her daughter's future. "I'll take it," she said firmly. Evelyn gave a curt nod and pushed the doors open. The room was bright and airy, with tall windows overlooking the gardens. Medical machines hummed softly along one wall, and in the hospital-style bed lay Nathaniel Langley. Clara's breath caught. The man before her barely resembled the commanding figure she had seen in old news articles. His face was gaunt, his once powerful frame now frail. Yet even in his stillness, there was something about him, a quiet strength in the set of his jaw, the defined arch of his brows. "You'll monitor his vital signs, administer medication, assist with therapy, and manage his daily care," Evelyn continued. "Dr. Sullivan visits twice a week to assess his condition. The night nurse will walk you through his routine." As Evelyn rattled off protocols, Clara felt an inexplicable pull toward Nathaniel's bedside. His dark hair had grown shaggy, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. His eyes remained closed, thick lashes resting against hollowed cheeks. "What happened to you?" she wondered. That evening, after completing her training and settling into her quarters in the Langley estate, Clara sat beside Nathaniel's bed, reviewing his medical records. The details of his accident were frustratingly vague. A skull injury from an undisclosed event. Doctors had induced a coma, but when they attempted to wake him, he remained unresponsive. "Well, Mr. Langley," she murmured, "it's just us now." For a split second, she thought she saw his finger twitch, but the monitors remained unchanged. Probably her imagination. She'd been warned, when caring for a motionless patient, the mind often played tricks. As dusk settled, Clara ran through her evening tasks. She checked his stats, repositioned him to prevent bed sores, and administered his medications. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the steady hum of the machines. Later, as she got ready for bed in her nearby room, she called Lily. "How was your day, sweetheart?" "I miss you, Mama," Lily's small voice crackled through the line. "When will you come home?" "I'll see you Sunday, sweetie," Clara promised. "And listen, soon we'll get a bigger place in Seattle with your own room. What do you think?" "For real?" Lily gasped, excitement lighting up her voice. "Can it be blue?" Clara smiled, blinking back tears. "Any shade you want, baby." After saying goodnight, Clara checked on Nathaniel one last time. Moonlight streamed through the windows, casting silver patterns across his face. As she adjusted his blankets, her hand brushed his. She froze. Had his fingers moved? She watched him closely, but his face remained unchanged. The monitors showed no fluctuations. "I'm imagining things." Then, just as she turned to leave, she heard something, a whisper so faint it could have been a trick of the night air. "Save me." Clara's breath caught. She spun around. Nathaniel lay still, The monitors showed no change. Did he just speak? A chill curled around her spine. The loneliness must already be getting to her. Still, as she lingered in the doorway, a sense of unease settled deep in her bones. Why had the other caregivers really left? What had actually happened to Nathaniel Langley? And why were the details of his accident so sparse? As she lay in bed that night, the distant hum of medical monitors filled the darkness. She had taken this job for Lily to provide stability and a future. But now a deeper realization crept in. She might have stepped into something far more complicated and far more dangerous than just a caregiving role. Clara spent her first week at the Langley estate settling into a routine, but that whispered "save me" haunted her thoughts. Every night, she found herself watching Nathaniel's face more intently, searching for any sign that he was reaching out. That moment had awakened something in her, a quiet determination to uncover what had truly happened to him. During her evening shifts, she began talking to him, recounting her day, sharing stories about Lily, and reading snippets from the articles she had found about his past. Nathaniel Langley had been a titan in the corporate world, known for his sharp mind and relentless ambition. He had built his tech empire from the ground up, but unlike many in his industry, he had also been praised for his philanthropy, particularly for supporting single parents and education programs for underprivileged children. "You helped so many people like me," Clara murmured one night, scrolling through an old interview of his on her phone. "Maybe that's why I'm here, returning the favor." A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Sullivan stood in the doorway, watching her. He was younger than Clara had imagined, maybe in his late 30s, with warm eyes behind thin-framed glasses. "How's our patient doing today?" he asked, glancing at the monitors. "Stable," Clara replied, watching as he checked Nathaniel's vitals. "Dr. Sullivan, I've been looking into his accident. The report seems vague." The doctor hesitated, his hands pausing for just a moment. "Patient privacy, Miss Bennett," he said carefully. "I'm sure you understand." "Of course," Clara said quickly. "It's just spending so much time with him, I feel like knowing more would help me provide better care." Dr. Sullivan sighed, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "What happened to Nathaniel was complicated," he admitted. "The official story is a severe skull injury, but the truth is," he glanced at the door, lowering his voice. "Something unusual showed up in his toxicology report. A foreign substance in his blood." Clara's pulse quickened. "Are you saying he was drugged?" "I've already said too much," he muttered, quickly putting his glasses back on. "Just be careful, Miss Bennett. Pay attention to who comes and goes. And don't ask too many questions." With that, he turned and left, leaving Clara with her mind racing. That night, she started noticing details she had overlooked before. How Evelyn always seemed to appear unannounced at medication times. How the security cameras in Nathaniel's wing flickered off at odd moments. The next afternoon, while organizing Nathaniel's medical supplies, Clara discovered something hidden inside his nightstand. A small, leather-bound notebook. Its pages were filled with tight, slanted handwriting. One entry, dated the day before his accident, stood out. "They're closing in. If I don't make it, the key is in the cipher. Check the grounds." Clara's fingers trembled as she read the words. What cipher? What key? She turned to Nathaniel, staring at his still face, knowing that the answers were locked inside his silent mind. That evening, Evelyn appeared unexpectedly during dinner. "Miss Bennett," she said smoothly, "the board requires an updated health report on Mr. Langley. Bring it to the main hall immediately." Something in her tone sent a ripple of unease through Clara. "Of course," Clara said carefully. "I'll just finish administering his evening dose first." "There's no need," Evelyn replied. "I'll handle it." Clara hesitated. Dr. Sullivan's warning echoed in her mind. "Actually," she said, forcing a polite smile, "it's best if I stick to the schedule." Evelyn's stare sharpened, but after a moment she nodded. "Fine. But don't keep us waiting." As soon as Evelyn left, Clara administered Nathaniel's medication and hurried to the main hall with the health report. The grand office where the board met was empty. They stepped out for a moment, Evelyn said coolly. "Wait here." Clara sat in one of the plush chairs, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, right on time. "Miss Bennett," Evelyn snapped. "No personal calls during work hours." "It's about my daughter's school," Clara said, rising from her chair. "I need to take this urgent paperwork issue." Evelyn's mouth tightened, but she didn't argue. Clara hurried toward the front entrance, her phone pressed to her ear, pretending to talk as she veered off the main path toward the gardens. She needed to check the grounds, just like Nathaniel's note had said. The estate's landscaping was flawless, each flower bed carefully arranged. But as Clara searched, her eyes caught something unusual, a rose bush that seemed slightly out of place. She crouched beside it, brushing the soil away, and uncovered a small, metal plaque half buried in the roots. Etched into the metal was a series of numbers. 722-994-14-192-154. Clara's heart pounded as she memorized the sequence. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her. She turned to see Evelyn approaching, her expression unreadable. "The gardens are off limits to staff," Evelyn said sharply. "You should get back to your duties." Clara forced a smile, brushing the dirt from her hands. "Just admiring the flowers. Mr. Langley must have loved these gardens." Evelyn studied her for a moment before nodding. "He did." Now back inside. That night, after checking on Nathaniel, Clara sat on her bed, staring at the numbers she had memorized. They seemed random, but something about them nagged at her. On a hunch, she jotted them down and tried converting them into letters. Gvinst and Ginon. Her breath caught. That looked like a name. A quick online search made her blood run cold. Nexus Labs. It was a small research company, one that Nathaniel's business had been in talks to acquire before his accident. Their primary focus? Experimental neurological drugs. A sharp sound shattered the silence. Clara jumped to her feet. Nathaniel's water glass lay shattered on the floor, and his eyes were open. Her breath caught in her throat. "Nathaniel," she whispered, stepping closer. His lips barely moved. A twitch. A flicker. The heart monitor spiked for a brief second, then steadied again. His eyes fluttered closed. But Clara knew what she had seen. Nathaniel Langley was in there, and someone was trying to keep him locked away. That night, as Clara lay in bed, her mind churned. Nathaniel had woken up, even if only for a moment. That meant he wasn't as far gone as everyone believed. Someone was keeping him under, and she was starting to understand why. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. An unknown number. She hesitated before answering. A robotic voice crackled through the speaker, "Quit poking around if you care about your daughter's safety." Clara's blood turned to ice. Her hands clenched around the phone. The threat wasn't subtle, and it changed everything. She had taken this job to build a better life for Lily, but now, protecting her daughter meant getting her as far away as possible. The next morning, Clara used most of her first paycheck to send Lily to her aunt's house outside Seattle. It tore her apart to say goodbye, but she couldn't risk keeping her daughter nearby while she was tangled in something this dangerous. With Lily safe, Clara shifted her focus. She needed to know what Nexus Labs had been working on, and how it connected to Nathaniel. On her next day off, instead of leaving for a visit with Lily, she went into Seattle and used a public library computer to avoid tracking. The deeper she dug into Nexus Labs, the worse the picture became. One project stood out. A classified trial called MSS Mind Suppression Serum. Its purpose? To keep subjects in a controlled, unresponsive state while allowing external monitoring of their brain activity. Officially, the research had been scrapped after test subjects suffered severe psychological damage. But then Clara found something that sent a chill down her spine. 2 weeks before Nathaniel's accident, the lead scientist on the project, Dr. Ethan Wells, had died under suspicious circumstances. His death ruled a suicide. His final research notes flagged ethical concerns about MSS and its potential military applications. Her heart pounded. Had Nathaniel discovered something about MSS that someone didn't want getting out? Was he being kept in his coma on purpose? Clara returned to the estate with more questions than answers. That evening, as she finished Nathaniel's care routine, she caught sight of Evelyn outside, speaking with a stranger. A man in a sharply tailored suit. He moved with stiff, controlled precision, military. Clara snapped a discreet photo through the glass. Later that night, she ran the image through a facial recognition tool on her phone. The result made her stomach lurch. Colonel Richard Vance. A high-ranking officer in a classified government research division. What was a military officer doing at Langley Estate? A quiet rustling drew her attention back to the bed. Nathaniel's fingers were moving. Not randomly, rhythmically. Tapping. Clara grabbed a notepad and wrote down the pattern. Short, short. Long, long. Short, short. Long, long. Morse code. Her father had been a radio operator, and she had picked up the basics as a child. She decoded the sequence quickly. SO. A distress signal. Clara's pulse raced. "I'm here," she whispered, grasping his hand. "I'm going to help you." His fingers twitched weakly in response. A real response. Before she could say more, footsteps echoed down the hallway. She quickly adjusted Nathaniel's blankets, pretending to check the monitors just as Dr. Sullivan entered. "Everything all right?" he asked, glancing at the screens. "Yeah," Clara said evenly. "Just running the nightly checks." Dr. Sullivan hesitated, then stepped closer. "Miss Bennett," he said carefully, "I've been reading up on coma recovery cases. Some patients show responses to specific stimuli." Clara studied him. "Are you saying there's a chance he could wake up?" Dr. Sullivan glanced toward the door before lowering his voice. "Between us? Yes. But there are people in this house who would rather he stay under." Clara's stomach twisted. "The medication," she whispered. "There's an unnamed compound in his 4 every 6 hours. Dr. Sullivan gave a slow nod. "It's not a standard sedative," he admitted. "And I wouldn't be surprised if it's a version of Mrs." Clara clenched her fists. "If we stop it, would he wake up?" Dr. Sullivan hesitated. "It's risky. If we don't do it right, he could wake in a state of confusion or worse. But if we don't try, he may never wake up at all," Clara countered. He exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Look, I'm already in too deep. Evelyn has eyes everywhere. If you want to do something, you have to be careful." The next day, Clara devised a plan. She needed to get into the estate's security room. During her break, she feigned losing her staff ID badge and went to the security office, pretending to request a replacement. While the guards searched for a spare, she glanced at the screens. One feed caught her attention. A hidden gate on the back of the estate grounds. A plain white van entered through it every Tuesday night. She had to find out why. That evening, instead of leaving the estate, Clara hid inside the garden shed near the back entrance. At precisely midnight, the van arrived. Peering through a gap in the wooden planks, she watched as men in white coats unloaded steel crates stamped with the Nexus Labs logo. She strained to hear their conversation. "New batch, this one's holding better. Trial results look promising. Keep him under until the final formula is locked in." Clara's blood ran cold. Nathaniel wasn't just a patient. He was an experiment. She stayed hidden until they left, then slipped back toward the house. But as she turned the corner, she stopped short. Evelyn stood waiting for her. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing, Miss Bennett," she said smoothly. "I had such high hopes for you." Clara squared her shoulders. "What are you doing to him?" Evelyn tilted her head. "The real question is, what was he about to do to us?" Nathaniel Langley was close to exposing something that could have destroyed everything we've built. He had to be neutralized. "You drugged him," Clara accused. Evelyn's lips curved into a slow, icy smile. "We're not monsters, Clara. We're visionaries. And Nathaniel, whether he likes it or not, is part of something bigger than himself." Clara took a step back. "You're testing MSS on him." "Refining it," Evelyn corrected. "Every change in his brain activity brings us closer to perfecting the serum." Clara's stomach twisted. "You're using him as a lab rat." Evelyn sighed. "And now you're a problem." She snapped her fingers. 2 guards stepped from the shadows. "The latest batch needs a test subject," Evelyn said. "Congratulations, Miss Bennett. You've just volunteered." Clara's instincts kicked in. She spun away just as one of the guards lunged, dodging his grip. She had to get back to Nathaniel. She sprinted toward his wing, adrenaline surging. Behind her, Evelyn's voice rang out. "Find her, and make sure she never leaves this estate again." Clara barely made it to Nathaniel's wing before the guards caught up. She slammed the door shut, bolting it behind her. Her mind raced. She had to act fast. Rushing to the medical cart, she scanned the 4 bags hanging beside Nathaniel's bed. One of them, the one with the unmarked label, had to be MSS. Her fingers worked quickly, swapping the drug for a saline solution. If she was right, by morning, the drug's hold on Nathaniel would start to weaken. A heavy thud rattled the door. "Clara!" Evelyn's voice was sharp, cold. "This is pointless. There's nowhere to run." Clara's hands trembled as she tucked the real MSS vials into her coat pocket. The door burst open. Evelyn strode in, flanked by her guards. Behind her, Dr. Sullivan followed, a syringe in hand. "I'm disappointed, Miss Bennett," Evelyn said. "You could have had an easy life here. Now you'll be joining our other test subjects." "You won't get away with this," Clara shot back, edging toward Nathaniel's bed. Evelyn smirked. "No one will come looking for a desperate single mother who abandoned her child." Dr. Sullivan stepped forward, lifting the syringe. Clara braced herself to fight it. But then something unexpected happened. The heart monitor spiked. Everyone turned just in time to see Nathaniel's eyes flutter open. The moment was fleeting, but Clara saw it, the awareness in his gaze. He was waking up. Before anyone could react, she lunged at Dr. Sullivan, knocking the syringe from his hand. It clattered to the floor as chaos erupted. The guards grabbed Clara, but she fought against them, thrashing wildly. Nathaniel made a sound, a deep, guttural groan. And then, against all odds, he moved. His hand shot out, weak but deliberate, knocking over the floor stand. The saline bag hit the floor, snapping its line free from his arm. "Get him under control," Evelyn barked. But it was too late. Nathaniel's breathing quickened. His fingers flexed. His body, long frozen in stillness, fought to wake up. The guards hesitated just long enough for Clara to shove free. She grabbed one of the fallen 4 poles and swung. The metal rod connected hard with one guard's ribs. He grunted, stumbling backward. Dr. Sullivan backed away, hands raised in surrender. "I never wanted this," he muttered. "Evelyn forced my hand." Nathaniel's fingers twitched again. His chest heaved. His lips parted. Clara barely had time to register the moment before a new sound shattered the chaos. A gunshot. The sharp crack echoed through the room. One of Evelyn's guards staggered and collapsed. And then an explosion of movement. Armed men stormed through the door, their weapons raised. "FBI! Hands in the air." Clara froze. Leading the charge was a man she recognized instantly from her research, Dr. Ethan Wells, the scientist who had supposedly died. Evelyn's face drained of color. "You're supposed to be dead?" Dr. Wells finished, stepping forward. "That was the idea." He motioned to his team, who swiftly restrained Evelyn and her guards. "We've been onto you for months," Dr. Wells continued, turning to Nathaniel. "We just needed evidence. Thanks to Clara, we got it." Clara sagged with relief as the FBI agents secured the room. Nathaniel's eyes were open now, bleary but unmistakably focused. "Clara," he rasped. She rushed to his side, grabbing his hand. "I'm here," she whispered. "You're safe." His grip tightened. Dr. Wells turned to Evelyn, who was now in cuffs. "You'll be facing a long list of charges: human experimentation, corporate sabotage, attempted murder." Evelyn's calm facade finally cracked. "You don't understand," she hissed. "We were creating something revolutionary." Dr. Wells shook his head. "You were playing God. And now you'll answer for it." The FBI began leading the criminals away, leaving Clara and Nathaniel alone in the aftermath. Nathaniel turned to her, his gaze still groggy but clear. "You saved me," he murmured. Clara swallowed hard, brushing his hair back. "I had to. You deserved the chance to fight back." A ghost of a smile flickered across his lips. "You're the first person who listened." Clara felt her throat tighten. "And I'm not going anywhere," she promised. As sirens wailed in the distance, she knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of debriefings, medical evaluations, and headlines that swept across the country. Tech mogul Nathaniel Langley rescued from corporate conspiracy. Single mother exposes secret human experimentation at Langley estate. The world was captivated by the story how a forgotten billionaire had been trapped in his own home, silenced by those he trusted most. And how a single mother with nothing but grit and determination had uncovered the truth. Evelyn and her accomplices were charged with a long list of crimes, while Nexus Labs was shut down pending a full federal investigation. Clara, however, had little time to process the media storm. Her only focus was Nathaniel. For weeks, she stayed by his side as he regained his strength, helping him relearn the simplest movements, lifting a cup of water, adjusting his posture, taking his first unsteady steps. At first, his voice was weak, his words fragmented, but the determination in his eyes never wavered. And Clara never left. Nathaniel had spent 6 months locked in his own body, and now he was reclaiming every inch of himself. But there was something else too, something unspoken lingering between them. Late one evening, after another exhausting round of physical therapy, Nathaniel sat by the large window of his new recovery suite, watching the Seattle skyline. Clara brought him a cup of tea, setting it on the table beside him. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she murmured. He turned his head slowly, studying her. "I have a lot of time to make up for." Clara hesitated before sitting beside him. "What will you do now? Go back to running your company?" Nathaniel exhaled, shaking his head. "No. The board wants me back. But the past few months, they changed the way I see things." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" Nathaniel turned fully toward her, his gaze steady. "When I was trapped in that bed, I had time to think. More than I ever had before. About what really matters." Clara held her breath as he reached for her hand. "You matter." His voice was quiet but unwavering. "You and Lily." Clara's heart pounded. Nathaniel, I fell for you before I even saw your face, he admitted. I heard you every day. Your voice, your kindness, your strength. You made me want to fight. And when I finally opened my eyes, you were the first thing I saw. Tears pricked Clara's eyes. I didn't expect to find this, she whispered. I took this job because I had no choice. But then, I met you. Nathaniel smiled slightly. And now? Clara squeezed his hand. Now, I don't want to leave. Nathaniel brushed his thumb over her knuckles. Then don't. The next few months brought change, not just for them, but for the world Nathaniel had once ruled. He officially stepped down as CEO, handing the company to a trusted successor. But he wasn't walking away, he was building something new. With Clara at his side, he launched a foundation dedicated to supporting single parents, offering resources, scholarships, and housing assistance. Clara, with her first-hand experience, helped shape every program. And through it all, Nathaniel remained by her side. 6 months later, in the same small garden where she had first deciphered his hidden message, they exchanged vows. Lily twirled as the flower girl, giggling as she tossed petals. Their closest friends and family surrounded them, celebrating the moment that had once seemed impossible. As they swayed under the night sky, Clara rested her head on Nathaniel's shoulder. Thank you, he murmured. She lifted her head. For what? For finding me when no one else did. For hearing me even when I couldn't speak. Clara smiled, pressing a soft kiss to his lips. Sometimes, she whispered, the greatest love stories begin in silence. Nathaniel pulled her closer, his hold steady and sure. Then let's make some noise together. And as laughter and music filled the air, Clara knew this was the life she had fought for. A future built on love, resilience, and a second chance neither of them had ever expected.